Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, Social Security Pitfalls. I am Gabby Mansell. I am a family navigator on the family supports team here at the St. Louis ARC. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Nikki Mitchell.
Well, thank you for having me this evening, and thank you to everybody who is attending. Just a quick little bit about me. So, my name is Nikki Mitchell. I'm an elder law and special needs planning attorney here in St. Louis. My office is in the Kirkwood area. Um, and our office focuses exclusively on elder law and special needs planning. So, the things we're going to talk about tonight are things that I talk to clients about all the time. And in fact, I had a client in earlier today where we were having a conversation about some of these exact things. And um, so we're going to run through a couple of different things tonight. What I want you to kind of come away from this understanding are some of the programs and the terminology and who is doing what and who you'll have to interact with, those types of things. Because I know sometimes one of the most confusing things about navigating through all these different programs is simply trying to understand all the various acronyms and those types of things. So I'm hopeful that we'll try and get down into some of this. But I do want to set, a quick expectation that there are so many intricate rules in these programs that we're just not going to have time during the time we have allocated for this evening to go into all of the details of them. And so, it's very like kind of lawyerly of me, but you'll see spots where I go through where I'm like, well, this is mostly true, but there's some exceptions, right? Because there's always like got to be some exception to the rule just to keep us on our toes. And so we're going to talk about those things and then talk about kind of the best ways to handle some of them. So, kind of starting just from the top and understanding what we're dealing with here. So, we're talking about the Social Security system, which is administered by the Social Security Administration, or SSA. So, I will refer often to just SSA, or sometimes I'll just say Social Security, but we're talking about SSA. Even though the rules and everything that we will find for Medicare are put out by a different agency, the SSA does actually administer the application for and the denial of Medicare. And so often you'll see if you're submitting like a retirement Social Security application, where you're starting your Medicare, you're doing it through the SSA as well. In some states, not in Missouri, unfortunately, but in some states, if you have gone through the SSA to get on disability of some kind or onto some version of their program, and that coverage would make you eligible for Medicaid, your Medicaid coverage is automatic. So the SSA coordinates with the state Medicaid agency to start up your coverage, your Medicaid coverage. That does not happen here in Missouri. You have to do a separate Medicaid application, and we'll dig into that a little bit more as we go along. So there's some things to keep in mind as we go through here. So the employees at Social Security, their job is to simply determine whether someone is eligible for benefits or continues to be eligible for benefits, right? So these are people who are hired by Social Security to be the caseworkers. They are not social workers. They're not, I think they sometimes refer to themselves as customer service representatives, but technically they're not. Their job is to enforce the rules and making sure that you're following them as well. And so your experience with Social Security is going to depend largely on who it is you are dealing with when you are walking through these things, which caseworker you're talking to when you're either face to face or on the phone with them. And there's Social Security employees can have kind of a bad reputation, and there's a reason for that sometimes. And also, I will say that while they are supposed to determine if you're eligible or continue to be eligible, in some ways they don't have a lot of wiggle room in these things. In some cases, they do. And so sometimes I'll have people say to me, well, somebody else told me this is how it's to be, or maybe even I'm saying this is how it's supposed to be. And they're like, well, that's not what the caseworker did. Right. And so where there's a little bit of wiggle room, you might see different circumstances happening for different people. And there's not necessarily any rhyme or reason for why that happens. It's simply based on who you happen to have been interacting with. Some will be more helpful than others right now, and for the last little while, year or so, it's been very difficult for people to even get a hold of somebody at Social Security. And so wait times and things like that continue to be very long for them. So, you know, set yourself an expectation for that when you're going to be interacting with them. As far as applying for Social Security programs, any of the ones that we're talking about that are related to disability, um, there's a couple of things I wanted to provide links for you to and just point out to you. First thing I would say is review the compassionate allowances list, and it's linked here in the materials, which we'll get emailed out to you later. And double check that if you have a condition that is listed on there, that you know that it's on there, because if you have a disability that is on the compassionate allowance list, that means you get expedited review of your application. And it also shortens your Medicare wait time down to 5 months if it is an SSDI application, which we'll talk about in a second. So there are some definite benefits to following or filing an application rather under this process. And so I always just recommend double check it just in case they're adding new conditions all the time to it. So if you go to that link, you'll get the most updated version of things that fall under that category. And the other thing I always suggest people take a look at in advance as you're kind of preparing for submitting this application is to look at the adult disability report form. And there are links. The first link you'll see there is the link to that form. So you can take a look at the form and see what kinds of information it's asking for, because then you will have an idea of what you need to have on hand and ready to give to Social Security when you're submitting your application. You could fill out that form and submit it along with your documentation to Social Security, either handed in person or by mail. But probably the way you're more likely to submit an application these days is to do it online. And there's a link on that very bottom link there that will take you to the place where you can apply online. And there is a short little kind of fact sheet there on that homepage that tells you what documents you want to make sure you have ready to go there. You can also apply by phone, and you can also apply in person without that form being completed. They'll take down the information from you as you go through that process. I do like the online version of things because it does let you kind of track things. Once you create the account, you'll be able to go back in and see where things stand and what you've, keep track of what documents you provided to them and that kind of thing. So on the adult disability report, some things you're going to be looking at. So list the contact person who has full knowledge of medical conditions and the person's inability to work. We'll talk about that in a little bit more, but sometimes you'll put the contact person who's like maybe the easiest to contact, but what you want is the person with most information who's going through and providing that to Social Security. Be thorough about all the medical and or physical conditions that the person has, and use supplemental sheets if you need to. One of the things that I find in these settings and similar things where someone has to talk about all the ways that their disability may impact them is that people tend to want to downplay it a little bit. And this is not the setting where you want to do that. This is the place where you want to list all the ways that that you're impacted by your disability. I'll give you just an example because my husband fusses at me all the time. I'm also the worst about this, right? Because I'll complain and complain at home about something that's going on, and I finally go see a doctor about it, and they'll say, okay, well, tell me what's going on. And I'll say, well, it's this and this and this, but I, maybe don't say necessarily how bad it is. And so I'll come home and say, yeah, well, the doctor said it's fine, there's nothing. And he's like, but did you tell him this was going on, that was going on? It's, nope. But that's because, right, I was trying to go in there and be like, it's not a big deal, whatever. Don't do that here. Be as thorough as you can about all the conditions, even if it's not the primary disability that you think you're actually going to win, or rather be awarded a disability um, benefit for, still put all of that information in there. And then I think that if you, before you start, have full list of all medications and a full list of all of the doctors that you're seeing. So you may have one primary doctor who treats the primary disability that you're dealing with, but then you're going to have potentially all the others. You want to list all of those on your, or at least have the information ready to enter into if you're doing it online. Again, medical treatment, anything that you've done, make sure that you are providing all the medical information that you can, including all the providers. Social Security will let you upload medical records yourself, but if you didn't and you just put the contact information for the physicians, then they will request medical records on your behalf. So just make sure you're being very thorough about who you're putting down for that. Section 11 is one that I want to touch on because there's whether or not you're eligible for a Social Security disability program is really kind of a two-pronged test. One is your disability, or does your disability meet the definition for that particular condition according to Social Security for you to be quote unquote disabled? But the second part of that is your disability so severe that you cannot engage in substantial gainful activity, or SGA, such that you can't be self-supporting? So meaning you cannot work, or you can't work enough to earn whatever the SGA limit is, which we'll talk about more in a second too. So this section 11 is a place for you to be able to say that, in addition to saying, here's how I've maybe tried to work and it's not been successful for me. Or if you have worked in the past, here's what I did in the past, but here's why I can't do it anymore. Those types of things. Again, if you've got medical records and things like that, you're welcome to go ahead and provide those yourself, but they will request them if you don't have those already on hand. And then there's a link here to just a little kind of FAQ that Social Security has for the kinds of questions that you're going to be asked, so that you can, prepare for those and prepare for any information you need to have, or documentation of verification of the answers that you're going to give to those questions. Another place, I don't really suggest that you spend a ton of time going through and looking at this, but I do want to just make note of them. So when we're dealing with Social Security, we have federal statutes, federal laws that apply to them. We also have federal regulations that apply to them. And those things, so the laws are set by Congress, the regulations are set by the Social Security agency. Those have to follow formal rulemaking processes. They're not easy to change. You can't come in and just change regulations kind of willy-nilly. But then they have these POMs, and the POMs stands for Program Operating Manual System. The POMs are Social Security's interpretation of the statutes and regulations, really built mostly for their caseworkers, who could go in here and see, here's what we interpret these things to mean. And here's some examples of how you would work through a claim that contains these kinds of facts. And this does change all the time, and can change all the time, and does not require any sort of formal notice to the public or anything like that it's happening. And so it is not uncommon where you might go into one section of the POMs, and you would see up in the upper right hand corner, it'll have a date, and that's the last date that it was changed. So for me, if I'm working with the POMs and I'm trying to make an argument to Social Security that the POM says do A, B, or C, I'm making note of the date that POM section was last changed, because if I go on there 3 months later when Social Security is finally reviewing this and questioning me, if they happen to have changed it, I want them to follow what was in place when I made my argument. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, I don't know that this is something you want to spend too much time going into, but there's a link down at the bottom if you do. But this is what caseworkers are looking at. Caseworkers are not looking at statutes and regulations. Caseworkers are looking at the POMs. Okay, so I'm going to pause just for a second since we're before we start diving into the actual benefits at Social Security and see if there's any questions there.
Yeah, we actually had a question about palms.
Mhm.
We were wondering if there was a certain amount of time that it changes, or if it sporadically changes, or if it's happened maybe even under this administration recently.
Mhm. So it changes all the time, different sections of it. There's no set like, every January you can expect certain changes or anything like that. It does change with administrations because the different administrations may have a different policy on how they want to treat some things. And the palms themselves are huge. They're massive. They cover all the different areas of Social Security. So, um, for the things that I work on the most, so like special needs trust provisions, able account provisions, the childhood disability benefits, those types of things, I haven't personally noticed any changes in the last, well, let's say this year. I can't think of one that's really changed this year so far. But I'm sure that there have been lots of changes in all the other areas. I'm just not dealing with them on a super regular basis. But yeah. So let's kind of turn our focus to the different kinds of programs you would be applying for, right? So one thing that happens a lot for me is people will come in and say, "Well, I'm on disability." And that is not enough information for me to know exactly what program we're dealing with. And so there's always going to be follow-up questions that I'm going to ask you. But the kind of blanket term for is to say I'm on disability, right? Because that's just how people are referring to these programs. So um, the main programs we're dealing with Social Security that they're administering is Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. SSI is a program that provides a monthly payment to people with qualified disabilities and the elderly. I say the elderly, well, we'll go into that in just a second. This is the most restrictive program, so it has a lot of rules about what you can have and what you can earn in order to stay eligible for it. And so this is the one where if you don't have any work record, you don't have to have paid into the system and you can still be eligible for SSI. SSDI, or Social Security Disability Income, is a monthly payment to people with qualified disabilities who have paid into the system. So you have a qualifying work record and you have become disabled, and simply by virtue of paying into the system for the qualifying quarters, you now are eligible for this monthly payment. The payment will be based on how much you've paid into the system over the years. And so this one is not as restrictive. It does have some income rules, but it does not have any asset rules. And then lastly, we have what people often consider like the real Social Security is technically called disability insurance benefits or retirement insurance benefits. So DIB, RIB. Most people just say I'm on Social Security, and this is the bucket of money you're pulling from if that's the case. So for people who have hit their retirement age, depending on what that is for you, if you're collecting benefits from Social Security, you're on Medicare, all of those types of things, this is the program we're talking about. There's one other program that is called shouldn't be children, should be childhood disability benefits, or was previously called DAC, or disabled adult children. So CDB is a program that says if you are an adult worker who is applying for your retirement benefit and you have an adult child with a disability who was disabled prior to age 22, then they are eligible to collect SSDI benefits on your work record. And we'll talk more about this one in a little bit, and some of the kind of nuances to the eligibility for this program, but this is another one that everybody should be aware of. So this is a little kind of cheat sheet that I've given you that just says what the different programs are, kind of what the eligibility for it is, how much you're getting, things like that. So I just want everybody to make note of these income caps in that fourth row down. So the monthly payment for SSI is $967, but they do a $20 income disregard. So you can make, if you made $987 per month, that would be the income cap. Again, we'll put a little star next to that because there's some exceptions to that. If you are under your full retirement age, and that what that age is varies for different people, but if you're under the full retirement age, which is mostly going to be these days 66/67, depending on what year you were born, and you make more than $23,400 per year, it will reduce your monthly retirement benefit. And then for SSDI, that's the one, remember I said they don't care about assets, but they do care about income. And the income number is the substantial gainful activity amount. And for 2025, that's 1620 per month. If you're not blind, if you're blind, it has a higher income. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But this is something for you to come back to if you just run a really quick chart to look at, but we're going to dig into these a little bit. I also want to just compare Medicaid and Medicare. It would have been real helpful to all of us if they had bothered to give them names that didn't sound so alike, because it causes a lot of confusion for people about which one we're dealing with. But Medicare is an entitlement, right? You hit a certain age if you've paid into the system and you become eligible for Medicare. Medicare has a standardized monthly premium that is usually just auto deducted from your Social Security retirement check, unless you have lots and lots of income, and then the premiums can look different, but otherwise everybody's paying the same amount. One thing to make note of for Medicare is there's a lot of programs that are not paid for by Medicare. So a lot of people come in to see me and think, well, I'm on Medicare, so like my long-term care is going to be paid for, and I'm going to get all these in-home, in-home caregivers paid for by Medicare, and that's not the case. And in fact, the program that does cover those things is Medicaid. And so we'll talk a little bit about those, but they both have so many rules associated with them. We're not going to spend too much time. I just want you to understand that, there is a difference here in how we are doing it. Another thing to just make quick note of is this is state recovery. This line on the bottom, Medicare, never going to be an issue. Medicaid can be.